If you listen to the media during women's basketball games, you'll think that women's basketball and girls basketball in the United States has never been better. And if you use certain metrics, it's probably correct. Anytime there's any question of whether or not girls or women's basketball is doing well, the media will point to Candace Parker, Brittany Griner, Diana Taurasi, Maya Moore, Simone Augustus. The list goes on. A number of great players, and we're probably able to watch some of the best women's basketball players to ever play as part of this generation. So if you're using that metric, then yes, women's basketball is doing very well. Similarly, you could point to the success in the Olympics. Similarly, if you want to use UConn as an example, as probably the most dominant team in the history of college basketball, again, it's another metric that you can point to suggest that girls and women's basketball is as good as it's ever been and is only getting better. However, if you look at the high school level, I think you can get a different viewpoint, and one that is somewhat concerning. So I've talked to people at a few schools recently in large cities and large schools. So we're talking over 2,000 people, students in the school. And they can't find enough players to come out for teams to even field a junior varsity team. So they're lucky to get 12 girls in an entire school of 2,000 people to try out. They're not even cutting girls. Even back, whatever it was, almost 6-7 years now, when I coached, again at a large high school 7 years ago, we didn't cut anybody. We were fortunate. We had a varsity JV and freshman team, and every girl who came out got put on one of those three teams. So there we had about 42 to 45 players, involved between the three teams. So a lot more players involved, and that was 7 years ago. And even then, we still weren't cutting anybody. Anybody who came out could make the team. Whereas if I think back to when I was coaching, back when I started in the late 90s and early 2000s, there were schools, with only 200 students in them who had a varsity and JV, and they were cutting players from those teams because they were having more players try out for those teams. They would only be able to keep 12 or 15 on each of those teams, so somewhere between 24 and 30 players, and they were getting 50, 60 players trying out. And now we look around and 2,000, 3,000 students in a school, and we can barely find 12 players who want to come out and play basketball. And so, whereas, you can point to the success at the highest levels to justify anything that's going on and to promote women's basketball and to suggest that it's as good as it's ever been, I think it's concerning that, at these schools, these large schools with plenty of athletic potential at the school, and there's not enough players interested in basketball to field more than one team, or to even field, in some cases, an entire full roster of a varsity team, 12 to 15 players. And obviously it differs from area to area, and some parts of the country will have, full varsity JV freshman teams, stacked with players trying out and getting cut, so on and so forth. So this probably isn't, relevant to every city and every state. But I know of at least 3 major cities, and probably top 20 population cities in the country, where I've spoken to coaches and athletic directors in those areas, and they're very concerned because this is what they're seeing. They're seeing less and less players coming out as freshmen to try out or to become, high school basketball players. And whether that's because they've tried at a younger age and been cut from a team, or because the high schools kind of pick and choose already and adopt kind of an AAU team that feeds into their school, and so they only take those teams or those players from that AAU team, or because they're in a poorer neighborhood and they don't have any, junior high sports, or elementary school sports, and maybe not even PE, and they can't afford to find a good club team, or maybe they're only playing at a YMCA, maybe they enjoy it, maybe they don't. Whatever the case may be, there's probably a ton of reasons why this is happening, but it is happening. And I think as much as we want to celebrate the success of players like a Tarasi or a Moore, a Griner, etc. I think that we also need to be concerned about what's happening with players that are going to be those players 10 years from now. And are we, is the depth shrinking? Are there fewer players? And what's causing there to be fewer players and fewer competitive players moving into the high school levels? Because ultimately, professional success and international success in the Olympics is only one metric by which you measure the success of basketball. And a potentially more important metric would be the number of players participating and the number of players who are able to get physical activity and stay healthy because of their participation in sports, through adolescence. And so if these numbers are decreasing and we're getting less physical activity and, less healthy behaviors, at younger and younger ages, to me that's disconcerting, and that's something that we should at least be aware of and at least make an effort to try to correct and try to find ways to be more inclusive of players and to keep players in the competitive stream longer, as opposed to being quick to cut players, in youth basketball, where now if we're cutting and cutting and cutting, and we've only got 10 or 12 players in a community, going into that high school, and then we don't have a JV team because, even though there's 1,000 girls at the school, we've cut away, and they've either adopted a new sport or they've given up sports and gone to different activities or, whatever the case may be. So, by all rights, celebrate the success at the highest levels, but let's not forget that to attain those high levels of success at the elite levels, we need to have a deep pool of participants at the youth level, and if that is shrinking, that becomes problematic to the future success and needs to be addressed by those who are working with youth teams, youth players, high school teams, feeder programs, and so forth, so that we can create as many opportunities for as many players as possible.